This Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, June 14th, 2023, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week on the Roundup, we take our questions that we ask and answer here on the Roundup from our newsletter that comes out on Monday mornings. And if, depending on where you are in the world, it comes out 9 a.m. Eastern Time to those who have subscribed through our website, and I'll drop the link in the chat. That's smieconsulting.org/subscribe. If you prefer an email version in your inbox, you can sign up that way. If you prefer to get it via LinkedIn, we have an a LinkedIn version of our newsletter that has over 1,000 subscribers, 1,100 subscribers now, and has really allowed us to expand our reach in terms of the content of our news stories that we cover each week and our hot takes on those, and then go in depth into 3 themes that we see generating around similar news stories that we see. So that's what we do each week, and I want to also give a special shout out, obviously, to those that watch live each week on our social channels for SMIE Consulting. Also, those who listen to the audio-only podcast. If you prefer to listen to this content while you work out, work, or walk, whatever floats your boat. Hopefully, you're getting some decent content here, some thoughts-provoking responses to these questions that may help you do what you do better in international education in your institutions or organizations. So thanks again, everybody, for making our Roundup a part of your international edification each week. And let's get right into our first question of the day. One that is a little bit out of left field in terms of and a surprising one, in terms of what prospective students, how their habits may have been changing, particularly as a result of the pandemic, and how that is impacting the application process and the timeline that students are working on before applying to universities. So the question is, are students changing how long it takes to research universities? And we're going to jump right in with a survey that was featured in the ICEF Monitors report last week. What it is, it's an extracts of the Keystone Education Group's 2023 State of Student Recruitment report that was conducted between January and April. So the results have been made public. They were shared at NAFSA, and here's some of the follow-on from that. So that one of the takeaways that kind of prompted this question is a major global survey conducted earlier this year, this is from the ICEF Monitor report, shows that 56% of surveyed prospective students began researching study abroad options only 6 months before applying to a university, or even less than that. So this is fairly significant. A little bit of perspective on this one. When I started working with Education USA back in 2008, one of the things that we developed in the first couple of years as we looked to promote the U.S. as a destination for international students is the challenge of trying to define the process. Because the process begins with a heavy amount of research and understanding of what the options are for students before they actually choose to apply and where they choose to apply, narrowing down their list and all of that wonderful thing. When we share in what we came up with at the time, developing your 5 steps to U.S. study, which is still very much a part of how Education USA talks about U.S. higher education to prospective students and parents all around the world at the undergraduate and graduate level. One of the things that we talk about is for undergraduates in particular, which was the primary focus here, and graduate applicants, but primarily undergrad, is you looked at how long should students start their process before they want to enroll? So this is a little bit different question here, but at a minimum, we would talk 12 to 18 months out from when they plan to enroll. That they would start their search. Now, this survey asks how long is the front end of that process, the research phase, before you start applying. So that's obviously a different end game, but it's saying within 6 months. So I think what we see in the looking historically back, we would say because in the U.S. we see our domestic students seriously start researching in their junior years, so potentially up to a year and a half, 2 years before they enroll. And if they're starting in their junior year, that's a full year before they apply. Now what we're seeing with international students, and maybe this is because so many more institutions have gone test optional. That's one potential cause for this. One of the factors that usually was an important step in the decision-making process is visiting campuses and finding out what you want to do. Now, with obviously the pandemic really impacted how students choose, particularly domestic students even domestic students choose not to visit in as large a numbers. They may have it high on their list of things to do when they're sophomores or juniors, but when it comes down to it, not as many actually visit colleges before they make their decisions. This is another survey that came out from Encora, State of College Campus Visits, and it shared that in their most recent student sentiment research indicated that 82% of high school sophomores and juniors reported plans to visit colleges before they apply. Okay, yet only 48% of seniors said they did. So the expense, the organizational piece of having to physically visit, that everybody thinks it's a good idea. The greater majority, 82%, when you're a sophomore and junior, think it's a great idea. I want to definitely visit these campuses before I decide where I'm going to apply. Those decisions are getting pushed. Maybe they don't visit at all until they enroll, or only after they're accepted and they go to one or two campuses that they've been accepted at. So this is redefining how students are conducting their research, what's important in that research, and why perhaps do we see the numbers or the percentage of students that are not visiting campus that are potentially also the ones not or starting their process sooner. Part of that might be the test optional piece that Liza mentioned, that there are so many more colleges now have, and we'll have a story about that in the newsletter next week, but so many more colleges now are not requiring SAT or ACT. So those tests typically are taken in the spring, typically in the spring of the junior year for American domestic high school students, and when many competitive international school students will start taking their SAT, ACT in the spring, and then once again in the fall of their senior year. So this is this process. Without having to take those tests now and knowing, okay, schools that I'm applying to are not looking at test scores, maybe I don't need to take that, so I don't need to wait. I don't need to start my processes early. Now we're seeing with one of potentially other complicating factors in the campus visit. We know during the pandemic, campus visits were basically shut down. Some colleges did soldier on and had everybody wear masks that came to campus, but those were very limited and few and far between. But when campuses started reopening, campus visits didn't pick up in the volume that they might have been previously. So the importance of the college visit might be complicated here by when the pandemic hit, changed the way we do things. All colleges and universities invested in more virtual ways to do college tours or to share their college campuses with prospective students. And that process allowed a wider range of students by offering videos and personalized campus tours that were done virtually, and having snapshot videos of different parts of campus life really allowed prospective students to get a fuller range of what that campus experience is really like before, without having to go physically to be on campus. And that's obviously logistics and everything that for international students is even more complicated than the domestic students in terms of ability to travel to the U.S. just for college visits. You have to be very, very wealthy to even think about trying to do that. So what I think is what has happened is that research time before applying. Maybe if you're applying as a junior or senior, or as a senior in your final year of high school or your final year of university for a graduate program or a transfer applicant, you might be able to do it now with getting all your information in a quicker amount of time. Obviously, the wealth of resources that are available that help students distill that vast number of 4,500 institutions in the U.S. down to a manageable number. there's a lot more options to help students do that. There are a wider range of agents available, wider range of online sources, more instantaneous responses that they can get from campuses and potentially prospective current students on those campuses that can help outline what the actual campus situation is like, and students can get a much more robust picture earlier in the process, as in the past, the universities were a little bit more in control of the messaging in terms of what students got at different points in their application journey or admissions journey to applying to and being admitted and enrolling in their universities. So the research piece is that time, that first bit before they apply, is that amount of time shortening? It probably is, and there are potentially a few different reasons why that's happening, because they have better access to information. They can do a lot of the homework themselves in terms of getting that personal connection about a campus, what it looks like to live and walk around and study there, and really get a better experience of what's possible. The potential of impact of test optional on taking one less item out of what they need to apply to complete to apply to certain universities. And again, for those that are looking at the top schools in the country, the top 50 that have very selective criteria that accept less than 10% of their applicants, then that's a very small percentage of those applicants coming to the United States from overseas. So that there's, I think, it would not be useful to generalize based on just the most selective institutions, because the majority of U.S. institutions are not the most selective. The majority have a fairly reasonable minimal number of requirements for students to apply. It gets a little bit more complicated at the grad levels, but you see the process being a much more straightforward one. So I think it's the requirements. It's much easier for them to find out what those requirements are. It's much more easily identifiable in terms of the campuses that might be really good fits for them, in terms of networks that students might have, in terms of where their seniors have gone from their schools or their neighborhoods, and they're staying in closer touch. So they get better, maybe limiting their search more quickly in terms of throwing colleges in or out into their mix. But I do wonder about the impact of this more broadly on destinations, countries that students are applying to. I'd be interested to see where that figured in. There's no real mention of it in the story, so that would be helpful to me to understand if students are shortening the amount of time to research universities. Obviously, we have an American-centric view of this here in the U.S. in terms of, well, just looking at us, we're all different. We have very complicated systems in terms of how long it takes to apply. But if students are looking at the U.K., where it's UCAS, and this is all you need to in terms of how to apply, that's a very simple process. Identifying the programs at the specific universities might be a little bit more labor intensive. But in terms of other countries that these same students might be going to, the amount of time is, we're not just dealing with US bound students, we're dealing with international students who might be looking at Canada, Australia, UK, Ireland, New Zealand, other destination markets in Europe, perhaps Germany, France. They may be looking at 3 or 4 of those countries as potential options for them. So we might be on that long. So in some countries, the process may be fairly straightforward, like in the UK, but in others in the US, it's different at every campus. So there are general rules that we can share, or practices that we share in terms of what most commonly will be experienced by international students. But I think the rub of this is it's a changing playing field, I think, and that's a more rapidly changing playing field in terms of what students are, what is impacting students' thinking in terms of where to apply, how long it should take, what's going to be needed to apply. Those external factors are really can and do impact that timing. But I think what's also important is to look at where the students are looking to study, because that will have a much greater impact on the length of time that it takes to research universities before they apply. But to have the majority be applying within 6 months of starting their research, That's a pretty significant number, 56% from this Keystone survey of over 23,000 students, I believe. So there's some volume there that does lend some value to this. What I will say also, when you look at the survey from Keystone that's featured in this ISEF Monitor report, it said 3/4 of the students were also worried about safety of studying abroad, particularly when it comes to the prospect of racial discrimination. So the survey did have some interesting data points there. What has also impacted the number of impacted the results, but maybe answering that question, but also overall in terms of the time limits or time it's taking to apply before applying. Roughly half of all students in this particular survey were from Africa, where there's histories of lower visa success rates across the board for country destinations. So I think that might be impacting some of this piece as well. The other interesting factoid from here: students want to work while studying, whether part-time, full-time, or through internships. So that's something, an expectation that they have. So when we talked last week about meeting student expectations, that might be something you want to address early on in the ComFlow to let them know what the realistic options are. Because if you're in Australia or Canada or the UK, when they can work off campus 24 hours a week, from the start, that's a different prospect than only being able to work 20 hours a week on campus for perhaps jobs that aren't going to earn as much as working off campus. So that's something that impacts this. So interesting dynamics. Every survey is a little bit different, and some you take with a grain of salt. But this theme of the time it takes for students to do their research shortening before they apply, I think that's one to pay attention to longer term, and thinking about why that's happening and how your ComFlow might get impacted. We all know that students do a lot of research before they apply to us, before they even reach out to us to contact us. They may do their shadow shopping or mystery shopping on our websites, and we don't really hear from them until they apply. So tracking that journey is a little bit more complex for colleges in the U.S. to understand that narrative, but understanding that means they're making decisions on your institution without really even reaching out and letting you know they're interested. So that is something that we all need to be better aware of in terms of how we plan and how we make sure our sites have as much information as possible that answers these questions, that helps them make decisions on to apply as early in the process, and make sure that we're able to identify the needs that these students have, or the major expectations that they have that we need to either temper or readjust to make sure that they're aware of what the true story is in terms of what their life would be like if they join your college campus. So that's question number one. Let's move on to the second question. Is one that is a topic we cover regularly on the Roundup, and it always seems during the summer months to gain particular momentum, and that's related to the U.S.-India student pipeline, or India to U.S. Student pipeline. And the question is, how big will that pipeline grow? We've seen over recent weeks and months, we've seen a lot of attention being put on expanding access to visa appointments for U.S.-bound Indian students, and not just students, but also other visa categories that have had outrageously long wait times for a B visa to be taking more than a year to come for a visit for business or tourism. Student visa times have come down dramatically thanks to expanded visa appointment slots, to expanded access to those that have previously had a U.S. visa that have gone through security clearances in the last 5 years, not having to come and actually make the visa appointment. They just file their paperwork and then it gets sorted that way. So the reality is, in India, I think the signs have been coming for a while that this market is going to be exploding. It's already going to be, as of this fall, the number one student market in the United States in terms of total volume and in terms of new students. I believe that 100%. This fall we'll certainly see that. And the demographics are only going to be increasing. You see some of the complications that other destinations have had related to India with Australia. There's certain universities universities are not have stopped recruiting in certain Indian states because of huge volume of fraud that they've seen coming out through applicants there that have worked with dodgy agents. You've seen the issue of the two-step migrants from India and South Asia to Australia and the challenges that has posed. So there's been a lot of negative press as of late for Australia. The UK has seen more positive results as of late. Their numbers are coming up as their China numbers are starting to edge back down. So as a market, it's just huge. It's also now the most populous nation in the world. But certainly in terms of that young population, largest physical number of youth population, college-age population anywhere in the world is in India. So that's why there's that real growing demand. And we talked also about the increasing undergraduate demand for U.S. education and other countries. So that pipeline on a lot of different levels is growing dramatically. Now, the story that's coming out is from the U.S. mission in India. That they're gearing up for what they're calling another record Indian student visa applications this year. So it looks at last year's number, a record-breaking 125,000 Indians were issued student visas in 2022, and they're saying in 2023 they're going to set another record as they expand. They have just recently had Visa Day in early June. That they prioritized across the country at all the different embassy and consulate locations for student visa interviews, that they recorded the highest volume they've ever had on that day. They also have recently the new U.S. consulate in Hyderabad has opened with an amazing number of additional visa windows that students can be interviewed at. There's been a lot of resources in terms of staffing poured in to make this happen. So I mentioned earlier on one day, in the Visa Day that they mentioned, they had 3,500 applicants this past Wednesday that applied for student visas. So the vast majority are getting approved. We're seeing some of our agents that are working on the ground in India posting successful days, the number of student visas they had approved. One of our agents is posting over 90% success rate. So those are encouraging steps and data that all point to one fact, that India is going to be the number one sender to the United States this fall and overall volume to the U.S. In terms of international students. So it's really exciting to see these results that international students students from India coming. There's been a lot of public relations that the U.S. mission has done in India to express to them that, yes, we know the wait times have been really long. We're working on it. We're adding all these new things, these new features, trying to make it a more streamlined process, all of that. And it seems to be working. Not only the internal in-country stuff that the U.S. mission has been doing, but also on a wider scale. There are more options available in the United States for Indian students than anywhere else in the world. There's historical ties with immigrant populations that have come over and worked. The ties between Silicon Valley and tech firms in the United States and India, and their tech valley between Hyderabad and Bangalore. You see all of these things happening that show the number of students that have come from India to the U.S. in the past couple decades that have made they are overrepresented in terms of the number of students who are on OPT. They're the vast majority of H-1B applicants every year. So there's real strong evidence to show that this Indian boom is going to continue to grow to the United States. So nothing but positives to talk about related to the flows of students coming from India. Now, we will end today with a topic that is an interesting one for those that keep, when we talk about our 6 Ps here on the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup, 6 Ps of Strategic International Enrollment Management. These are the processes and philosophical tenets that we use when we consult with institutions. What I'm using in my full-time job with University of Nevada, Las Vegas, we're implementing these 6 Ps into how we do strategic international enrollment management. And seeing enrollment management, long story short, is the entire international student journey from prospect to successful alumni. And that is the journey we want all of our students to complete. And when we focus as an institution on all those elements, not just in the front end of the process, getting them to campus and taking care of them once they in that first week or two, but also at each point during their journey on campus and preparing for life after graduation. We want their experience to be one that is recognized as significant and different and important by various offices on campus that will have to have services that cater to these students that have very different needs than the typical U.S. applicant or U.S. student coming to our college would have. So what are those 6 Ps? First one up is perspective, having that global perspective. And here's what we're talking about here in terms of perspective. Part of that is having a local perspective on what your strengths and weaknesses are as an institution, what your resources are in the community, having a national perspective, knowing what the hot topics are, what the strengths and weaknesses of the U.S. as a destination for college students are, and then also having a global perspective, knowing what our competition are doing for trying to attract international students to their countries, regarding their application process, regarding tuition and fees, regarding campus structure, work opportunities. All of these things are vital for us to understand when we are messaging to those students that might also be looking at these other countries. So knowing what other countries is doing. So this last question is related to China, and it says, is charging international students much more the route to success for Chinese universities? We had a news story in our newsletter this week that featured the Chinese government considering, and President Xi Jinping making the claim that we need to be doing more to improve our universities into world-class universities and focus having those institutions direct resources to make our innovation capacity. That's what President Xi has called what he thinks China's universities need to do more of, create that innovation capacity. And one of the things that is being considered is raising the tuition fees charged. Because they look around, and there's a story out that it will be in next week's. Actually, it won't be in next week's. It'll be featured here only on the Roundup, and that is China to increase international student fees in line with the UK and US. So right now, non-domestic or international students currently in Chinese universities pay around 20,000 yuan RMB per year. That's about $2,800 tuition fees. But researchers are suggesting now that amount will increase fivefold to 100,000 yuan. That's $14,000 a year. So that's what the potential increase would be. So significant, not certainly, that's a tuition amount that would be certainly under the average, certainly in the United States for tuition figures, but certainly puts it more in line with the global major destination markets. So perhaps the approach here is, boy, if we charge more, we'll be seen as better value. Maybe we're seen as too cheap. That's why we don't attract as many students. So this is the thinking now from China, that one of their paths towards that more world-class universities is we need to be charging international students more to study here. So this will be interesting to see how this plays out in China, because we also know over the past decade, 15 years or so, their Belt and Road Initiative, part of the real driving force behind the number of projects that the Belt and Road Initiative has been involved in South Asia, in Africa, even into Europe. You see those projects being driven by a goal to enhance Beijing and China's soft power. And it's largely worked in a lot of countries that now don't want to make decisions that necessarily upset China because they've invested so much in their countries in terms of infrastructure projects. There's questions on, and not all of those projects have been the best of the best, but it's been a way for China to exert its influence. Part of that educationally has been the number of scholarships that have been offered to attract pre-pandemic over 500,000 international students to China. And those numbers have dropped dramatically, obviously, because you couldn't get into China for 3 years. That now you're in the situation where, as an international student, you have many more options, the English language options in China than you did 10, 15 years ago. So it's become an increasingly popular destination. It previously had been one that was subsidized largely by the Chinese government through scholarships, but now may not be as significantly subsidized, particularly if they're going to be increasing those tuition figures up to the amounts that you see advertised. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty on campuses. As I mentioned before, I'm leaving on Saturday for a 2-week trip to China, taking our provost, who's not been to China yet, to meet with some high-level universities in Guangzhou, in Wuhan, in Beijing, and meeting with Ministry of Education officials and having these conversations to elevate our status as an institution in the eyes of Chinese universities. But on the campuses that I'll be meeting with contacts that we're going to be partnering with, figuring out what kind of programs we want to work on together. There's going to be a lot of I'll be asking questions just to get to know them a little better about how active are you in terms of bringing students to your institutions from abroad, not just U.S. students, because right now there's challenges for U.S. students getting in terms of flights, in terms of costs, in terms of perceived safety issues, those kinds of things. State Department has a travel warning, level 4 travel warning for China. So that's a real challenge for U.S. students, but other countries that's not as much of an issue. So I'll be talking to my counterparts on these other campuses about what they're doing to make their campuses more attractive to international students, and see what the reporting is on the ground there. So my next 2 midweek roundups will be from China. So we'll hopefully have some interesting insights to share with you in the next couple of weeks. Obviously, those will be taped and not live because of the differences in time. So it'll go out at 1 p.m. Eastern on the Wednesdays, the 21st and the 28th. But you'll have an opportunity to hear from me as I go through this experience in China the last 2 weeks. It's been 15 years since I've traveled to China, so it's going to be interesting to see the differences, the change to almost cashless society for anything to do with travel in the country, got my Alipay app, linked up my cards, and be able to use that to buy things in China. That's going to be interesting. Getting my WeChat up and running again. Hasn't been a while since I've used that regularly. So those are the travel challenges. There might be some of that in the roundup next week, but certainly we'll be sharing that into the impact on China. So that's all we have for you this week on the roundup. We thank you again for being a part of the conversation, and we look forward to chatting with you live not live. I'll be in China next couple of weeks. So until then, have a great day.